If you feel like you're burning alive right now, I need you to hear this. The fire in your life isn't trying to kill you. It's trying to untie you. Stick with me here. Welcome back to another Mindset Method video. This is just a time where I come to share a few words that I hope help impact someone on their journey through fitness or their journey through life. Today we're going to be talking about the fire, the fiery furnace. And I want to reference the story of the Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were thrown into the fiery furnace by Nebuchadnezzar. You know, in our life, we all have something that is seemingly burning us up. It's too hot. It's too intense for us. Situations or seasons that we come into in our life where we feel like we're literally on fire, like we're burning up, like the life and vitality is being burned, and the heat and the intensity of our situation is too much for us to bear. If it feels like that, right, I want you to know that it's not meant to destroy you. It feels like that, but it's actually meant to help you. Because the fire isn't necessarily your enemy. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they went into that fiery furnace bound. But scripture says that the fire never touched their skin or hair. However, it did burn the ropes off of them. The fire had a job. It wasn't to destroy them, but it was to free them. So if you aren't familiar with the story of the three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, basically they were captured in Babylon captivity, and there were kings like Nebuchadnezzar reigning over the area, and their goal was to get the people to conform to their ways of living. And the Hebrew boys were refusing to bow down to them. And because of this, they were bound and thrown into the fire. And so as we think about the reason for the fire, right, which is to burn, that was meant to burn the bounds off of them, right? This can tie into our own lives, because there are things that we are in bondage to, things that are seemingly constraining us, constraining our will, things that have us in a grip that we cannot untie, right? Things that have us so in bondage to it that it is preventing us and restricting us from living freely as God intended. And for most of us, right, myself included, we're in bondage, or we have been in bondage to things that we, personally allowed ourselves to become bound to, things that we actively participated in. However, the Hebrew boys were in bondage because they refused to bow down to the king. And for some of us, we are in bondage to things that we had no control over, right? Because see, they were in bondage because of the area that they lived in, because of where they were, right? Because they were captured, right, in Babylon captivity. And so some of us, right, are in bondage to things that we didn't necessarily actively participate in. We grew up in certain areas, right? And so we're in bondage to certain ways of thinking, certain ways of being, right, that we kind of grew up in. So essentially we didn't really have much control over. We're in bondage to default ways of thinking because this is how everyone else around us thinks. And so we see here, right, in the story with the three Hebrew boys, that they refused to bow down to the king. It says here in Daniel 3:15 through 18, "But if you do not worship, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we would not serve your gods or worship the image of God of gold that you have set up. The Hebrew boys refused. And so because of their refusal, they were thrown into the fire bound. But I want you to see the Hebrew boys refused to allow that physical bondage to control their conscience. They said, do whatever you got to do, King Nebuchadnezzar, but we would not bow, right? We would not allow you to control, right, the way that we act. We would not allow you to control our worship and our dedication to our God because you're threatening me. And so as we think about this story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we attempt to tie this to our own personal stories, our own personal experience with bondage, and we see here the saving grace of God, right? Because they refused to bow down to him, and they were eventually thrown into that fire bound. But they refused to lose faith in the God that they serve. And so I want you to know that your greatest power in your fiery furnace right now, as you're facing the intense heat, is to remember the God that you serve, to keep faith in the God that you serve. As we continue with the story, we see that King Nebuchadnezzar here in Daniel 3:24, it says, then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and said unto his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto him, King, true, O king. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the fourth is like the Son of God. The king expected 3 men in the fire. However, he saw 4. And so we see here that God did not forsake them. So see, they, right, had a level of faith that says, you can do whatever you want to do. I trust that God is going to deliver us. Even if you throw me in this fire, I trust that God is going to deliver us. And so for most of us, we're like, God, why did you allow me to fall into this troubling situation? Why is all of this going on in my life? Why am I facing trouble in every corner? Why is the heat so intense right now, God? And sometimes what we see is God is working on our behalf, that God would never forsake us, because God allowed them to go into that fiery furnace to burn that bondage off of them. But we see that even in the fire, Jesus was there with them. It says, behold, I see 4 men, and the 4th is in the form of the Son of God. Jesus was right there with them in the fire. And so what I want you to take from this is, even if God doesn't stop you from going into the fire, even if he doesn't rescue you from that fire, that Jesus is right in there with you. And so, like the Hebrew boys, your greatest strength comes from keeping your eyes on the 4th man in the fire, from remembering the God that you serve, that he will deliver you from whatever situation that you're going through. Because maybe the intensity of your situation right now is meant to burn that bondage off of you, to release you from things that you have not been able to release yourself from. And I want you to know that you may be going through an intense situation, but God gives you grace. And so you will fall, you will stumble, right? If we think about the story of Peter, he was walking on water, right? Peter wasn't sinking because Jesus wasn't there. He was staring right at him. He sank because he measured the wind instead of keeping his eyes up, keeping his eyes on the only one, right, who can actually save him. And so as you're facing the situations, right, as you're facing the things, this intense heat, right? I want you to know that Jesus is already there with you. He's already in the fire. It says that Peter was walking on water and Jesus was right there in front of him. But because Peter began to pay attention to the circumstances, the things that were going on around him, he began to sink. He called out to Jesus, and Jesus didn't let him drown. He actually reached out and helped him. And so you have permission to stumble. And stumbling doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means that you're human. But remember that there is a fourth man in the fire. Remember that even as you begin to sink, Jesus is right there in front of you. If you keep your eyes on Jesus, right, you will walk on things that most people drown in. If you keep your eyes on Jesus, you will survive in the fiery furnace, right, where most people would burn up in. And it says the Hebrew boys came out untouched. It didn't even seem like they were in fire. So if you keep your eyes on Jesus, it doesn't matter what situation you're going through, you're going to come out untouched. That situation is only freeing you from bondage. It's only freeing you from situations that you could not free yourself from. But keep your eyes on Jesus because he's in there with you. The goal in this is to remain faithful, to stand, right? To keep your eyes on that fourth man in the fire and allow the fire to do what it's intended to do. Because what walks out of this situation won't be a destroyed version of you. It'll be you unbound from whatever had you bound. You don't have to fight the fire. You just have to stand and keep your eyes on who's standing with you. Look, if this video helped you, drop a like, leave a comment if you have something you want to add to this. If you know someone who needs to hear this in this time, look, hit that share button. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is a good word. Look, it's your boy Fit Man Dan, and remember, your mindset is your greatest asset. Y'all keep stacking.